When it comes to the concept of child transitioning, the medical establishment has blood on its hands. And I'll explain what I mean in a second. My friends, I was recently on Twitter and I saw a video, a rather chilling video, from a user, Casey Miller, who is a detransitioner. For those of you who don't know what that means that this person undertook surgery to transition to their perception of themselves and now has regretted by some emotional or physiological reason, has regretted doing so and is trying to undo the damage that they believe they've done to themselves. And now this has been a phenomenon that has been growing and it has been manifesting in the cultural conversation surrounding transgenderism. And there are people who will say, oh, this is incredibly rare, this doesn't happen very often, although that claim is not stable because, as I'll explain here in a few seconds, this idea of transitioning people is a relatively new phenomenon in the 21st century. It happened a little bit before, but it's relatively new, especially as it relates to children. And this is why Casey's story tugged on to me, because I'm not someone who was going to sit here and criticize the voluntary and consensual decisions of an adult if I don't think that they're particularly wise for some kind of social action I might, but generally live and let live. But the fact is, KC claims that they began this process when they were 15. And this immediately made me think of gender ideology, the impact of gender ideology, and the concept of child or minor transitioning, which is so popular and hailed within the medical community. So I'm going to play Casey's video here for all of you. It's about a minute or so long. I'm going to play the whole thing because I want you to see the emotion. I want you to see the raw passion that this individual has. And then I'm going to address the bigger picture of this entire thing, which is not really often addressed when it comes to this issue. So without further ado, let's see Casey's video.
Hey y'all, so I got out of my haircut because my hair was driving me nuts, and I shaved it because I'm tired of watching my hair thin out, and it's less distressing if I shave it. So when I talk about being too far gone, I don't really know what else to call it. This is what I mean. This is how deep my voice is. It's gotten deeper over time, and it's settled. This is what I mean by hair loss. And it just keeps getting worse. It keeps thinning. It keeps receding backwards. And I'm not exactly sure that's coming back. Those are the main things when I talk about being androgenized to a point of no return. I really don't see those being fixable. So that's when I talk about, just kind of staying how I am, regardless of how I feel. That's why, just because I don't really see me personally being able to come back from what's happened so far. So I hope that's a little explanatory, just to kind of give a little bit more of a, let me reword that, just to kind of, talk about, give more awareness to the situation, kind of, so you can see where I'm at. Words are not working well with me right now. I'm just gonna cut this off. There you go. This is what happens when you give a woman testosterone. This for 5 years. This is what happens, essentially. So, that's it. Stay safe.
So my friends, first, my heart goes out to Casey, and my heart goes out to anyone who is dealing with this issue. I cannot imagine the emotional, mental, and physical torment that people who detransition have to go through. My heart, my prayers, and my thoughts go out to them. But what I don't have to really think too much about to understand is why this is happening. And I think the answer lies in 1991, when a lady called Teresa de Lauretis presented at a conference titled Queer Theory in the University of California, Santa Cruz, in which she said, and I quote, what she said, and I paraphrase, that the goal of her newfound theory, queer theory, was to disrupt what it meant to be gay and lesbian, to disrupt the normal settled idea of what it meant to be gay and lesbian, which simply meant to be attracted to either a man or a woman. And this is where the justification, the cultural justification for the TQ plus came in, and the TQ plus, all of that contains the sort of nucleus for gender identity. And so it's very interesting, my friends, because ideas develop in two different ways. There's many ways, but these are the two primary ways that I've seen throughout my study. Ideas can develop from a cultural baseline and become political, or they can develop from a political baseline and become cultural. The latter instance is what we call social engineering, when the government or some institution tries to implant their ideas into people through subtle ways, or maybe not so subtle ways, so as to produce a beneficial effect. And the former is what we would call, well, it's just the bad ideas coming into fruition and taking power. And that is precisely what the concept of minor and child transitioning is, which fits into the umbrella of gender ideology. It is a cultural poison born from false premises that is now wreaking havoc on people because it defies reality. Why is it a cultural poison? Well, I just mentioned De Laurentiis, and I just mentioned queer theory. For those of you who are unfamiliar, queer theory is this mechanism which allows people to deconstruct norms in society on the basis that all norms are oppressive, all norms actually hold down people who are minorities. And they do so from the basis of not improving those norms or making them better, but they do so from the basis of spoiling. Queering literally means to spoil. Spoiling and destroying those norms, and quite literally replacing them with subjective interpretation. But reality doesn't work that way. But ideas like this are quite popular, because the moment you tell someone you have the ability to be whatever you want to be, regardless of the limits of your humanity, regardless of the limits of physics or anything else, regardless of any other limitation that exists, is the moment you give someone a sort of emotional boost who doesn't like being told they have power, they have authority, they have control, and all of their wildest dreams, no matter how wild or unrealistic, can come true. That is essentially what queer theory does on a practical level, without getting too airy or getting too in the weeds. And if you want to know more about queer theory, please look at this video that I did right here about queer theory. It's a very long explanation, but this is the baseline of this idea. The idea of sex, which has always, for a very long time, has been man and woman, and in most mainstream cultures. And I'm not talking about cultures that had some sort of androgynous feature to them. In most mainstream cultures, it's always been man and woman. This is seen as an oppressive concept, man and woman, and so the queer theorist's job is to spoil it. How do you spoil it? With gender ideology. That is precisely what's happening. Now, when cultural poisons become politically popular, what happens? Well, what happens is they can be turned into a weapon. The fact is, the Biden administration is in full support of this poisonous idea. The Medical Association in America is also in full support of this poisonous idea. The Justice Department is in full support of this poisonous idea. So, for example, there has been a lot of outcry at different hospitals, such as the Boston Children's Hospital and many others, who offered transgender transition services for minors. For doing so, there's been a lot of outcry towards them. And when the outcry became a little bit too hot and there were threats received by these hospitals, the Justice Department made a statement, as they should have. But in the statement, the Justice Department said the following thing. They say that children deserve an opportunity to thrive and grow as their own authentic selves. Parents and guardians and healthcare providers who support them in that journey should be allowed to do so, free of threats and harassment. Now, notice the first part of that. Children deserve an opportunity to thrive and grow as their own authentic selves. So this statement here presumes that children have the ability to decide who they are in their childlike state, which is absolutely untrue, because the childlike state is inherently one of development, not one of stasis, not one of settled condition. Therefore, it is unwise to decide something for yourself when you are still developing. Yet the Justice Department, the highest law enforcement authority in the land, enshrined this in their ethos. Joe Biden said during the Transgender Day of Remembrance that to parents of transgender children, affirming your child's claimed transgender identity is one of the most powerful things you can do to keep them safe and healthy. I'm paraphrasing a little bit there, but that's the gist of his statement. And then, of course, the American Medical Association has tried to do several things. They have tried to, A, censor people who speak out against gender ideology because, according to the AMA, it allegedly leads to hatred of hospitals who do those kind of services, and that leads to misinformation. And not only that, but they also wrote a defense of child transition surgery by using the following justification, saying that as with all physical medical interventions, physicians are guided by their ethical duty to act in the best interest of their patients and must tailor recommendations about specific interventions and the timing of those interventions to the patient's unique circumstances. Such decisions must be sensitive to the child's clinical situation, nurture the child's short and long-term development, and balance the need to preserve the child's opportunity to make important life choices autonomously in the future. So the AMA, the largest association of medical providers in America, is also supporting this ideology. How does a cultural poison become a political weapon? Well, it can do so when that political weapon is cloaked under the guise of benevolence, and when that political weapon has the support of consensus. Jon Stewart, the comedian, he actually defended the act of giving transition services to children by saying that there is an overwhelming medical consensus that doing so actually helps their mental health. Now, this is not necessarily even true. There's actually a lot of what researchers have called design problems with studies that examine the effects post-transition surgery. And that's a whole other video in itself, but just to synopsize a little bit, a lot of studies that supposedly are the basis for this consensus actually have very low follow-up rates, which is very hard to understand long-term effects. And not only that, but a lot of these studies are done in the short term anyway. And the studies that have been done, several that have been done for the long term, show either in the best case a net zero effect on the mental development of the child or the person who transitioned, therefore making that kind of therapy useless, or in the worst case, and unfortunately in the most common case, it showed a bad effect. What's the point? The point is this: people like Jon Stewart use the word consensus to browbeat people into practices that defy reality. But my friends, consensus is not this sort of gospel truth that is being told. Consensus throughout history has been wrong. Medical consensus throughout history has been wrong. It used to be thought that if someone was schizophrenic, they were possessed by demons, and you had to drill a nail in their head to drive out the ailment. Obviously, we know that's not true, and obviously, we have different procedures now. But if we had clung to consensus, to popular demand, in support for certain ideas, we would never get that. This sort of intellectual laziness and logical errancy being embraced by a lot of people has much ado with this perceived idea of going after benevolence and little to do with actually caring about the truth of the matter. The problem is when the American Medical Association, the President of the United States, and the Justice Department say this is all okay, the media ecosystem bolsters their opinions because all these institutions, the AMA, Biden, they're all considered to be credible official sources. But what happens when credible official sources use their reputation for mistruth because it may serve them in the short term, or because they're misguided? What happens is a lot of people get misinformed about something, and that misinformation can not only hurt them physically and mentally, as is the case of a lot of people who transition, but it can also hurt their relationship with reality. And if you've lost your relationship with reality, you have lost everything that you could ever have. No amount of money you have, no amount of material possessions you have, no amount of status you have can save you if you've lost touch with concrete reality. And unfortunately, so many of our institutions are operating, again, on De Laurentiis' idea that we can subvert and destroy norms and we can leave them up to subjective interpretation And in doing so, they forget that there is something real, something concrete beneath a lot of concepts that this approach woefully ignores. The truth, my friends, is being sacrificed for benevolence. Benevolence and goodwill is a core function that helps society operate better. It is a social lubricant, so to speak. If I'm benevolent towards my fellow neighbor, I give him help when he needs help, or if I have the ability to give him help, I'm kind to him, I'm gracious to him. These are things that make us all, in many cases, if we're part of the common humanity, make us all feel good. But however, benevolence is no substitute for the truth. Benevolence, if it's going to be effective, should complement the truth. And instead of investigating the claim that a lack of gender transition leads to bad outcomes, instead of actually investigating that, that is assumed. And because there is a disposition for some people to want benevolence, and there is also an opportunistic use of benevolence from other people, they won't approach the topic. Because if they approach this topic, they become a bad person, or they become someone dealing in misinformation. And this is the problem. This is the final point I'm going to make here. This is the problem with the modern day narrative surrounding the issue of child gender transition. It's the issue that if you don't support it, you're supporting evil. When in almost every single case, when man cannot critically evaluate the ideas that he does support, he is in some way, shape, or form unwittingly participating, or even wittingly participating in evil. Rejection of reality for the sake of your own ideas is most certainly evil. Because without a concrete basis, anything can go, including activities that clearly don't work for some people. I'll say this before I go. People may say that K.C. Miller is simply a microcosm or simply a edge case. And there are other people who do transition who actually happen to be all fine and well. Maybe that's the case. But we also understand that this is a pretty new area of study and practice. The first gender identity clinic was opened in 2017. And the reason there's so much backlash over children's hospitals providing these services, not only because it's inappropriate and does not conform to the nature of childhood, but also because it's a new program. These are fundamentally new programs. And since this is a relatively new practice, it would behoove all of us to study the long-term effects of this practice, and some of the core studies cited by advocates of these practices actually do not do that. So we're back at square one. Truth is being sacrificed for benevolence. Truth is being sacrificed for consensus, a consensus bound by the subjective opinions of those who produce it. Truth is being sacrificed for all of this. And the more this happens, the more people like KC will continue to go unheard and ridiculed by people who are supposed to be in their community, and the more blood the medical establishment will have on their hands. The lunacy of child transition can only be justified if we look away from reality and toward these lofty ideas of how we think people should be able to determine things, and not at how people actually determine things. We ought to look toward what has worked. We ought to look toward what is empirically verifiable, and we ought to look toward truth and reason before defaulting to ideological poisons like queer theory to make some of the most consequential decisions that one can make, and that is if they will change their body through certain surgeries. Think on it, my friends. I love you guys so much. If you love me, please be sure to go to my Patreon, patreon.com/PhilC Watson, or my PayPal, officialcwatch@gmail.com. Like this video, subscribe to this channel, share this video, comment on this video. My friends, I love you guys so much, and please stay pensive. Bye, guys.